Where does this all go? Where does this all go? I think one of the problems is in this country, we are told, do you know the term American exceptionalism?
Sure.
Okay, how many of you travel to other countries? Okay, 3/4 of you. And when you travel to other countries, do you run into a lot of English exceptionalism and Paraguayan exceptionalism? You really don't run it. They don't. The anthems, when there's a war, the journalists don't necessarily have patriotic music and flags waving, because right away when you're a journalist, if you're covering a war, you're not really supposed to be saying, how are our boys doing? Even if they are your boys, that's not your job, And so we have a problem in this country that we are so heavily indoctrinated, really from birth, and at all of our sporting events, and at all of our concerts, and at everything else, we're constantly indoctrinated and encouraged essentially not to ask any questions. Listen, I love my country. I think the people who love their country are the ones who don't make excuses for it. I really believe that. And so, but what troubles me is something that Franklin Roosevelt once told me. No, actually, he didn't tell me, but he told it to somebody else. He wrote it, and there's a reference to it in Family of Secrets. He wrote a letter when he was early in his term, and he said, you and I both know, this was to a top advisor to Woodrow Wilson, he said, you and I both know the power is not here in Washington. The real power in this country resides in the great financial centers. Now think about that. That was 1933. That's 80 years ago. And what has changed? It has only gotten that much worse. And so Franklin Roosevelt understood that he was up against very, very powerful forces. And do you know about the coup against Franklin Roosevelt?
Smedley.
Smedley Butler, the Marine general. Yeah. If you want to read the book, Sally Denton, I don't know if Sally's here, but Sally lives here in Santa Fe, and she wrote a book. It's probably in the bookstore.
About Butler?
About the coup against FDR. The Wall Street people recruited a World War I hero and wanted him to stage a military coup against Roosevelt. And for your information...
It's a YouTube video. You can actually see him saying it on YouTube.
There were actually congressional hearings, and it's not in any textbooks or anything. And they just kind of... go right past it. And when I worked on Family of Secrets, I spent 5 years on that. I was trying to figure out the rise of the Bush family, how they got to the top and the things they did. And I had no answer. I had no agenda, except that I thought there's got to be more to this story. And I dug and I dug and I dug. And a year or two of very, very little, mostly meeting people who sort of weren't curious. And they said, well, what do you think you're going to add? We already know that he was a doofus. It was this, it was that, the father, their connections, money, who cares? And I said, well, I care. I'd like to know. And, after about a year and a half or something, I kind of dropped through a trap door into a whole other parallel universe. And that's the universe that's right here in Santa Fe with everybody with the security clearances and everything else. There are other things going on that people don't talk about. It's a complicated world. And our media, unfortunately, gives it to us like it's all baby food. And they really don't try to kind of contextualize anything. And so, when I looked at that, I saw that every single president of the United States had problems. Now, you could say it was an accident, what happened to Warren Harding. You can say that problems Wilson had when he didn't want to go into World War I, and what happened to him around the time of the League of Nations when Allen Dulles was a young negotiator, and they were encouraging Wilson, let's go in and grab our piece, colonially speaking, of all the spoils, and Wilson was uncomfortable with this. The truth is, the more you look into it, the more you find that presidents are people like us. But they're people who are seen by somebody as someone who they can ride them. And they say, this person is attractive. He's the president of Princeton University. He's a black constitutional law professor. It's a woman who could be the first woman president. And the people, all they want is something new. A woman, a gay president, a black president, this, that, somebody who's good looking, somebody who speaks well. That's all the public has an appetite for. That's all the media has an appetite for. And those poor people, I hate to use the term schnooks, but they get in there and they have no idea what is going on. I kid you not. They get in there, and here's what it's like. You got a 6 a.m. briefing, okay? Now just imagine you're Barack Obama. 6 years before he was president, he was a state legislator in Illinois. Now, he gets in there now, Mr. President, and all these guys, generals and whatever, he has no idea who they are. He's never met them before. And they say, Mr. President, we've looked at this and we see several options. Already he's lost. And so the system itself is very, very problematical. John F. Kennedy, somebody here quoted, I don't even remember, I guess it's in my book, the reason Kennedy was killed was because he thought he was president. you know, they get in there and they sort of think, you know, Obama thinks, yeah, I'm going to pull out of Afghanistan. They go, sir, no, you're not. And so they learn, and then all these weird things start happening. I don't know if you know, we have an article called What Obama is Up Against. And it's all these strange things. The Secret Service dropped his top secret schedule in a gutter when he was in Australia, and it was found by Australian journalists. And then a man fired a rifle into the White House, and then that weird couple got in there and scared the heck out of him. Remember that? Yeah. Do you know how the couple got in there? They got in through Robert Gates' office. You know, I wrote an article about it. Never got picked up by the mainstream media. How did they get their passes? Who was helping them out? You know, I mean, this is important because Robert Gates was Obama's what? He was his Secretary of Defense, but he was also before that the Secretary of Defense for George W. Bush, and he was also the CIA director for George H.W. Bush. Do you start getting the picture here? There's a kind of a continuity, and in a sense, both political parties are sort of branches of the same thing, and this is why. When you watch the debates, you know, Dennis Kucinich is so far off camera that he's not on camera practically, you know, and he gets to say less than anybody else and so forth. And it's not just him. There are other people, Mike Gravel, a man who used to be a U.S. Senator, you know, don't want him to say anything. Obviously, he's a kook, you know. And so we don't really have a dialogue in this country about options. You ever heard of the 1%? And by the way, I got nothing against the 1% because, you know, we solicit donations and there are some wonderful people. Some of the richest people in this country are as upset as you and I are, maybe there may be one or two in this audience, as upset about what's happening in this country and want to do something about it. So it's really not us versus them on that basis. It's us versus them in terms of the people who care about other people and those who don't. And so I think we have to kind of look at all of these problems with water and uranium and all these things and say, who's really ruining life on Earth? Who's really hastening, as some scientists say, that 50 or 60 years from now, potentially there could be no life on Earth? I don't know if you've heard this. There are credible, internationally known scientists who actually are saying that. And so it's probably worth inconveniencing ourselves a little bit to deal with this. All of these issues are related to the nature of the state itself. The nature of the state itself. And, you know, to some extent, this country has always been run by moneyed interests. If you go all the way back to the Founding Fathers, it was not exactly representatives of ordinary people. I don't have time here, and there's some very, very fine books by, you know, who they are with other alternative histories of this country. But it is healthy to at least acknowledge that and talk about it. And, you know, some people say, well, we don't have a democracy anyway, we have a republic. And I say, well, I'm not so sure about that either. But, you know, at least let's talk about these things. Getting back to the issue of cyber and our need to spy on everybody else, the fact of the matter is we're actually in bed with the same people we're spying on. And I just read, have you heard this? The United States just ordered attack helicopters from Russia. Okay, I mean, they have joint ventures. I've met people here in Santa Fe, very rich people, and they all saying I'm on my way to Beijing because I own a company there. Okay, so when they tell us that we, you know, the Chinese are, you heard about that, they were spying on us, they're breaking into our computers. Remember they made a big deal about that? They made less a deal about the fact that Snowden revealed that the U.S. is breaking into their computers. And then in the end, we're all business partners. So we need to talk openly about what's really going on here. And I would argue to some extent what you're seeing is a division of the world by elites against everybody else.